place where simply stepping outside makes your breath freeze in midair, where smartphones shut down within minutes, and where cars must run nonstop for months or risk never starting again. Welcome to Oymyakon, Siberia, home to just 800 residents who somehow endure life in the coldest, permanently inhabited place on Earth. Where temperatures plunge to minus 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Where are you watching from? And what's the coldest temperature you've ever felt? Daily survival routines. In most places, you turn on a tap and hot water flows out. In Oymyakon, bathing begins with chopping firewood. The entire process takes 4 to 5 hours just to produce enough hot water for one bath. Families typically bathe once a week, usually on Saturday or Sunday, making it a significant weekly event rather than a daily routine. The permafrost, or year-round frozen ground, makes laying and maintaining water pipes impossible. Residents must travel to the frozen river, cut blocks of ice weighing about 66 pounds each, and transport them home on sleds. These ice blocks are then stored either in cold rooms inside houses or outside in gardens, creating personal ice reserves for drinking water, cleaning, and basic hygiene. When families need water, they take one of these ice blocks and slowly melt it in large barrels. The ice from the river is surprisingly clean. Though residents typically scrape off the outer layer as a precaution, the bathroom situation presents its own unique challenges. Without indoor plumbing, residents use small, unheated outdoor huts built in their yards. There's no sewage system, and using these facilities means putting on multiple layers of clothing and moving quickly to avoid frostbite. Even though the distance from house to outhouse might only be a few meters, it's an experience that requires mental preparation and physical endurance every single time. Children in Oymyakon face their own daily challenges. They wake up in the warmth of their homes, able to wash their faces and brush their teeth in relative comfort. But getting to school means bundling up in many layers of clothing for a half-kilometer walk through conditions that would shut down entire cities in other parts of the world. Remarkably, the school only closes when temperatures drop below minus 67 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature so extreme that it's hard to imagine anyone venturing outside. The morning routine for adults centers entirely around survival and resource management. Men often spend their days hunting, not for sport, but for survival and protection. They search for animals that have died not from predator attacks, but from becoming trapped and unable to move enough to keep themselves warm. Every part of these animals becomes valuable. The hide is sold for income, while the meat serves as bait for hunting bears and other predators that regularly threaten the village's livestock. Women in Oymyakon take on roles that require extraordinary patience and skill. Traditional cosmetics become not just useless, but dangerous. Applying mascara or foundation can cause eyelashes to freeze solid or skin to crack almost instantly upon stepping outside. Instead, these women become master craftspeople, hand-sewing traditional unti boots from reindeer hide, creating essential survival gear that no modern factory could replicate for these conditions. The paradox of modern life. Let me share the most mind-bending example. In Oymyakon, refrigerators aren't used to cool food, they're used to keep it warm. Think about that for a moment. With outdoor temperatures regularly hitting minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit, the environment itself becomes a massive deep freezer. If you leave meat or milk outside, it doesn't just freeze, it becomes rock solid and will shatter on impact like glass. So, residents use their refrigerators as insulated chambers, maintaining food at a more stable temperature around 14 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. This prevents food from freezing beyond the point of being usable while keeping it preserved. In Oymyakon, the refrigerator becomes a warming device, the hallway becomes the freezer, and the entire concept of food storage is turned completely upside down. The local market presents another surreal scene that perfectly captures this paradox. When you see blocks of what looks like white marble or construction material being sold, you're actually looking at fresh milk. Liquid milk cannot exist in Oymyakon's market conditions. Glass bottles would shatter instantly as the liquid inside freezes and expands, and plastic containers become brittle and crumble in the extreme cold. So farmers have developed the most natural packaging method imaginable. After milking their cows, they immediately pour the fresh milk into rectangular molds and place them outdoors. Within moments, The brutal cold transforms the liquid into solid blocks as hard as stone. Customers purchase these milk blocks and take them home to slowly melt as needed. It's a perfect example of how extreme conditions force innovation that's both primitive and ingenious. The relationship with fire in Oymyakon represents another fundamental shift in perspective. In most of the world, fire represents danger and destruction. In Oymyakon, fire is literally life itself. If a stove goes out unnoticed during a winter night, it's not just an inconvenience, it's a potential death sentence. Within hours, the cold would invade every corner of a home, and residents could freeze to death before dawn. The crackling sound of burning firewood isn't just comforting. It's the clearest proof that a family is still alive. This creates a constant awareness and relationship with fire that most modern humans have completely lost. Every piece of firewood represents hours of life. Every flame must be carefully tended, and the responsibility of maintaining heat becomes a 24-hour commitment that can never be taken lightly. If you're finding this information absolutely mind-blowing, hit that like button and tap the hype button on your phone to support the channel. The more support you give us, the more amazing videos we can bring you about the most extreme places on Earth. The economics of survival. Living in Oymyakon completely transforms the basic economics of daily life in ways that reveal just how much we take for granted in moderate climates. Agriculture is completely impossible here. The soil throughout Oymyakon cannot support plant growth because organic matter cannot decompose and enrich the soil in these temperatures. This creates a food economy that seems backwards to most of the world. Vegetables and fruits are more expensive than meat, sometimes dramatically so. The inhospitable climate and enormous transportation costs make fresh produce luxury items that many families can only afford occasionally. This forces a meat-oriented diet that's actually perfectly adapted to the extreme conditions. For breakfast, residents often eat high-calorie foods like greasy pancakes with jam. Since daily temperatures during the day is quite low, the human body constantly expends enormous energy just to maintain its core temperature. This is especially true in the morning when the body has been inactive during the night. Fatty foods become the most efficient source of necessary energy because they take longer to digest, sustaining the body's energy production for hours. This provides continuous internal heating, essentially turning food into fuel for the body's heating system. What might seem like an unhealthy diet in other climates becomes a precisely calibrated survival strategy in Oymyakon. The tradition of eating raw fish, called stroganina, represents another perfect adaptation to local conditions. When you cook fish, beneficial fatty acids, vitamin D, and enzymes are destroyed. In places like Yakutia where sunlight is scarce for months, vitamin D becomes incredibly valuable. Raw fish provides these vitamins and fats in their most natural form, making it a biological adaptation strategy rather than just a cultural preference. Livestock farming becomes the cornerstone of the local economy. But even this requires extraordinary measures. Residents breed Yakut horses and cattle, benefiting from their meat, milk, and hides. But keeping these animals alive requires constant vigilance and innovative protection methods. Farmers wrap the teeth of cows in thick cloth to protect them from frostbite and keep them functional. If the animals are harmed, human survival in the region becomes impossible very quickly. The strong odor in the barns makes breathing difficult, but residents become accustomed to it because the alternative is starvation. Every morning, the cows must venture out into the brutal cold to reach the river for water. One by one, they step into what can only be described as an icy hell, moving quickly because they instinctively know they must return before the cold becomes too harsh. Their hair becomes crusted with ice almost immediately, creating a scene that looks more like a nature documentary about prehistoric survival than modern farming. The wild Yakutian horses represent perhaps the most remarkable adaptation to these conditions. These horses don't need heated shelters because they can endure minus 158 degrees Fahrenheit outdoors day and night. Unlike regular horses, they're short and compact, which helps them retain heat because a smaller body radiates heat over a smaller surface area. Their bodies look puffy and round, not from fat but from incredibly thick fur. Their horseshoes are specially designed to be very tall, allowing them to stand on freezing ground for extended periods. Large piles of hay stored since summer become their main food supply during winter, representing months of preparation for survival. The biological paradox. You might assume that living in such extreme cold would make people constantly sick, but Oymyakon reveals one of nature's most fascinating paradoxes. At temperatures plunging to minus 60 degrees Celsius, most viruses and bacteria that cause common seasonal flu simply cannot survive or multiply. This creates an extraordinary phenomenon that seems almost impossible to believe. The residents of Oymyakon, living in one of the harshest environments on Earth, rarely catch colds. Their immune systems are remarkably strong, and they enjoy a relatively high average life expectancy. Centenarians aren't uncommon here, which seems to defy every assumption about harsh living conditions shortening life. But this biological advantage comes with a dangerous flip side, because their bodies are rarely exposed to everyday pathogens. Their immune systems can react aggressively when they travel to warmer, densely populated cities where bacteria thrive. It's like their bodies become so adapted to the sterile environment that they lose some ability to handle normal microbial exposure. Even more critically, if someone develops an acute medical condition requiring surgery, evacuating them by helicopter in winter becomes nearly impossible. Aircraft fuel can freeze solid in midair, and emergency medical response that we take for granted in other parts of the world simply doesn't exist during the harshest months. This creates a unique relationship with health, where prevention becomes absolutely critical because treatment options are severely limited. Residents develop an intuitive understanding of their bodies and early warning signs that most of us never need to cultivate. When death itself must wait. Perhaps nothing illustrates the extreme nature of Oymyakon more powerfully than what happens when someone dies. In most parts of the world, laying a loved one to rest takes only a few hours. In Oymyakon, it becomes a brutal battle against nature that can last for days. The ground here exists in permanent frost, so hard that it defeats drills and iron shovels. The earth becomes like concrete, completely impenetrable to normal digging methods. To prepare a grave, residents must begin a ritual that seems almost medieval in its difficulty and duration. Large fires are lit directly on the ground, and the heat slowly begins to soften the frozen earth. When the flames die out, workers can dig down just a few centimeters before hitting frozen ground again. Then they light another fire and repeat the process. This cycle continues for up to 3 days and nights until the grave reaches sufficient depth. Imagine the emotional weight of this process. Families are dealing with the grief of losing a loved one while simultaneously facing days of backbreaking physical labor in deadly cold conditions just to provide a proper burial. In Oymyakon, death brings not only emotional suffering but also a relentless physical ordeal for those left behind. This reality forces the community to come together in ways that most modern societies have forgotten. Preparing a grave becomes a collective effort, with neighbors and friends taking shifts, maintaining fires, and digging through the night. It's a profound reminder of how extreme conditions create bonds and dependencies that comfortable living never requires. Transportation and vehicles. Oymyakon present a big challenge when it comes to surviving traffic. The air is freezing cold, and the fumes from car exhaust cool down and create a foggy atmosphere. The means of transportation in Oymyakon are interesting too. Before cars existed, people used horses, oxen, and reindeer for transportation. Reindeer are very important in this region. They are used not only for transportation but also for their meat, milk, and hides. The cold is so severe that even the sturdiest vehicles become inoperable without the proper precautions. If a car is left outside for just an hour without starting the engine, it will freeze completely and must be thawed out before it can be started again. People use jet heaters to warm their cars. If a villager is fortunate enough to have a heated garage, he can store his car there for months without risking engine failure. Some people in that region never turn off the ignition and leave the engine running all the time. In such an environment, not only do people approach freezing point, but fuel, oil, batteries, tires, and metal components do too. In other words, turning off an engine in such cold temperatures means you may not be able to start it again easily. This is because engine oil freezes or condenses. The car battery loses its electricity. Similarly, the gasoline in the vehicle freezes. Even the air in the tires loses its function due to the cold. For this reason, taxi and minibus drivers in the region, especially those who work in the morning, start their vehicles early and leave them idling until evening. This keeps the engine fluids and fuel system operational. The tourism of extremes. Oymyakon has become an unlikely destination for adventurers from around the world. But this isn't tourism as most people understand it. This is tourism as a test of human endurance, where the line between excitement and death is no thicker than a failed winter coat. Every visitor who survives the experience receives an official certificate from the mayor, a testament to having conquered the coldest inhabited place on Earth. These tourists often conduct experiments that can only be performed in such extreme conditions. They throw cups of boiling water into the air and watch them instantly transform into clouds of ice dust. They use frozen bananas as hammers to drive nails into wood, demonstrating how the cold transforms everyday objects into tools. But this extreme tourism comes with real risks. Visitors must understand that this isn't a controlled environment or a theme park. The cold doesn't distinguish between locals and tourists, and the margin for error is essentially zero. Proper preparation isn't just recommended, it's literally a matter of life and death. The fact that people choose to visit Oymyakon for the challenge reveals something profound about human nature. In our increasingly comfortable and controlled world, some people are drawn to places that test the absolute limits of what's possible. Oymyakon offers an experience that no amount of money can replicate anywhere else. The chance to understand what humans are truly capable of enduring. The culture of ice fishing. In Oymyakon, ice fishing isn't just a method of obtaining food, it's a cultural, social, and almost ceremonial activity that reveals the deep relationship between humans and their environment. From November to late April, all major rivers and lakes freeze completely, with ice often reaching between 5 and 2 meters thick. Fishing requires drilling through this massive barrier, correctly identifying where fish are located in the underwater layers, and using specialized cold-resistant equipment and clothing. The tools required seem more suited for construction than fishing. Metal-tipped spears, axes, and iron picks are used to cut through ice that's harder than concrete. The physical effort required just to access the water below would exhaust most people before they even begin fishing. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. Fish caught through the ice freeze instantly upon being pulled from the water. They're either eaten immediately while still fresh, or kept frozen for later use. Most of the time, the fish is consumed raw, which, as we discussed earlier, provides essential nutrients that cooking would destroy. The knowledge required for successful ice fishing in these conditions represents generations of accumulated wisdom. Fishermen must understand ice thickness, water currents beneath the ice, fish behavior in extreme cold, and weather patterns that can change from manageable to deadly within minutes. This isn't recreational fishing as most people understand it. This is fishing as a survival skill, where success means the difference between adequate nutrition and malnutrition during the long winter months. The social aspect comes from the fact that ice fishing often requires multiple people working together, sharing knowledge, tools, and the physical labor of cutting through the ice. What we've discovered today in Oymyakon challenges every assumption about human limitations and what's required for a meaningful life. These 800 residents haven't just survived in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. They've created a thriving community that demonstrates extraordinary human adaptability, ingenuity, and resilience. From refrigerators that warm food instead of cooling it, to milk sold as solid blocks, to graves that take 3 days to dig. Oymyakon reveals a world where normal rules don't apply, but human creativity finds a way. These people have mastered survival techniques that most of us can't even imagine, developed community bonds that put most modern societies to shame, and found meaning and purpose in daily challenges that would overwhelm people living in comfortable conditions. But the most important lesson from Oymyakon isn't about surviving extreme cold. It's about recognizing that humans are capable of far more than we typically believe. If people can not only survive but thrive at -71 degrees Celsius, what challenges in your own life might be more manageable than you think? What communities could you build? What skills could you develop? What meaning could you find in your own daily challenges? The residents of Oymyakon prove that with the right knowledge, preparation, community support, and mindset. Humans can adapt to almost anything. They've turned the world's most hostile environment into a home. And in doing so, they've expanded our understanding of what's possible for all of humanity. I'm fascinated to know what surprised you most about life in Oymyakon. Was it the way they use refrigerators to warm food? The 3-day process for digging graves? Or maybe the fact that people rarely get sick in such extreme conditions? Share in the comments below which aspect of their survival strategies impressed you most. And let me know if you think you could handle living in conditions like these. If you found this exploration of human adaptability as mind-blowing as I did, make sure you're subscribed because next week I'm taking you inside another extreme environment where humans have found ways to thrive against impossible odds. You won't believe what people are capable of when survival depends on innovation and community. And if you want to dive deeper into extreme survival stories and human resilience, check out the video I've linked on screen now about the most isolated communities on Earth. You'll discover even more incredible examples of how humans adapt to environments that seem completely uninhabitable. Thanks for joining me on this journey to the coldest village in the world. Until next time, stay curious about what humans are truly capable of achieving.